big thing. Nick, is there anything else you want to either plug? Oh, Our Revolution. You said you were part of Our Revolution. Now, I don't know the story. So how did you guys start that? Because apparently at some point all of you guys left Our Revolution. So what's the story around Our Revolution? You were there. You were one of the founding members.
Yeah.
And apparently after a month, you were out.
I helped found Our Revolution with Bernie and a number of others. Some of them joined his campaign in 2020 again. Other ones didn't. But essentially, what happened there was one of the lessons that led me to the Movement for a People's Party.
Right.
And it was the fact that after just about a month, after having founded it, we kind of discovered that the campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, had been talking to billionaires about starting to use the C4 status of the organization to take money from billionaires and to take money from the grassroots at the same time, but not telling the grassroots that Our Revolution was now taking money.
Wow.
And so, for example, he was having conversations with with Tom Steyer. He's going to talk to George Soros.
Yeah.
And these were exactly the billionaires that had financed the Hillary Clinton campaign and that we had run against. Just before, and we were still signing all the emails, paid for by Bernie Sanders, not the billionaires.
Yeah.
And that to me was it was so kind of
a deal breaker.
It was so offensive. That would happen, and we tried to convince Jeff and Bernie and others not to do it. But they wouldn't pull back. They wouldn't pull back. But until we said, well, this isn't right. If you do this, and we can all transport ourselves back to that mentality.
Yeah.
Bernie had a halo around him that was transcendent.
Yeah.
People didn't see him as a politician. He was incorruptible.
Clinton hated that because in her mind she was like, the guy's a politician and you guys are acting like he's above politics.
Exactly.
And he wasn't above politics, but I think it's the honesty thing. I really do think when a person comes across as authentic, it's such weird for that person to exist in politics like that. And so I think there's that element to it where it made him seem like he was above it all. It's a really strange. I know what you mean, though. There was a halo effect around him. I agree.
Yeah. And so those of us, who were there, most of the staff said, we can't just sit by and let you do this, because what's going to happen in short order is that it's going to leak or it's going to get out, and and it's going to be devastating.
It's destroy your credibility.
It's going to be devastating to your credibility. That's right. To find out, oh, by the way, after the campaign, that we ran against the establishment, Bernie's organization was taking that money, and as a result, actually, of leaving, it put the kind of public pressure on Bernie and Our Revolution to, and the new board, because this was another thing. The board, was not very diverse.
Now, understand what he's saying here. Brana was basically around when they were starting Our Revolution. Now, this was the organization that Sanders helped found. And Brana is basically saying that Sanders was willing to take billionaire cash working with Jeff Weaver for his organization. Brana is right. That would have entirely destroyed Sanders' credibility, and it would have tarnished him for any run that would have taken place in 2020. It makes you look like you're being a hypocrite on that front. The same attacks that were used on Warren, where they could say something to the effect of, well, hey, you didn't have any issue with those wine crowds before, would also be able to be used against Sanders if he's taken a holier-than-thou approach from SuperPACs and these type of things, if he was willing to do that. Brana and the staff basically backing out of this actually did Sanders a favor, whether he realizes it or not. Not to mention, I suspect Nina Turner is probably better than Weaver. Jeff Weaver has just done something, not just Jeff Weaver, several people who are working with Sanders has just done something that I consider an outright betrayal of the progressive movement. I find it to be betrayal on so many levels, but I want to hit three main ones. Jeff Weaver, Rocha, the Hispanic outreach, in addition to one or two other people, let's see, top Sanders officials from the 2020 race who will be involved: Chuck Rocha, senior advisor who focused on Latina outreach; Tim Tigris, who oversaw digital strategy and fundraising, Sheila Jackson, a California strategist for the campaign, Mark Longbaugh, who worked for Mr. Sanders in 2016 but left the campaign early on, is part of this new group. Basically, what's taking place is Jeff Weaver and these guys are joining a super PAC in order to get Joe Biden elected. Let me repeat that. Rocha, Weaver, Tim Targris, Sheila Jackson, Mark Longbaugh, these guys who work with Sanders, top surrogates, top advisors of Sanders in 2020 and in 2016, are leaving in order to create a super PAC in order to get one Joe Biden, a person that supposedly doesn't represent any of their policies, elected into office. Yeah, I find this to be a betrayal. I'll explain what I mean by it. You can give me your opinion on whether you think I'm right or not. But of all the things to be done in this very specific moment, and it depends on how you're functioning, right? But I would say if I am functioning from the standpoint of the left and from the standpoint of best interests of the left, this is a nitwit, incompetent policy that basically has been followed for the last 40 years and has zero chance of success as you basically incentivize the battered wife syndrome in a political sense, but battered wife nonetheless. But look, I don't necessarily know what these guys are in the race for. My functioning, and I would imagine if they were working with Sanders, I would think that they would, on some degree, be functioning from the standpoint of the left. But if you're so willing to blow off this other stuff in order to form the super PAC, in order to do this, and again, he was willing to do the same thing for our revolution, meaning this is not atypical of Jeff Weaver. That's the first thing that I thought of after I heard, when I read this article. Basically, Weaver has no issues with the super PACs or whatnot. And they're perfectly okay with using these, even if it's to get mainstream, centrist, corporatist Democrats in office. And this is the guy who Sanders chose to advise him. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. Just for a few points before I get into the story. The email list is not included, meaning Bernie Sanders' email list has nothing to do with this organization that Weaver is starting. In fact, Sanders has nothing to do with this organization. When asked for comment, they basically said, look, Sanders is not on board for this. He would find this would be an unfortunate path for us to take in order to accomplish our political objectives. So Sanders hasn't necessarily wavered on the point of the super PAC stuff, but it is something to be said that all of these people who were around him basically blew it off in a heartbeat in order to get Biden elected. After railing about super PACs for the last, 8 years at this point, you turn around and you basically immediately form a super PAC when the corpse of your candidate is barely cold. That looks bad. Now, you can make a case and say that basically, look, Sanders was my client, and as my client, my ideology diverges from his, and so these are different things. Meaning, I'm not breaching any ethical guidelines from my standpoint because the client and I have different ethical guidelines. I am functioning in the capacity of a professional, not necessarily ideological. So fair enough. You can make that case. But the problem here is the people who you're going to try to con are lefties and Hispanics into the party. What argument are you going to make to lefties in order to get them into the party? What argument are you going to make to Hispanics? What do you believe that you're going to tell them about Joe Biden that they didn't necessarily know, that they didn't necessarily latch on to already? How are you going to scare them into the party? How are you going to sheepdog? How are you going to do it? Now, the catch here is you're using a super PAC to convince people to vote for a candidate. The people who you're trying to convince were ideologically against super PACs. Understand how weird that is. You're basically trying to make an argument to people that they should vote for Joe Biden for some reason. And in making whatever argument you're going to make to these people, you're basically using an edifice that they find to be flawed. Flawed because they believe it adversely affects the candidate, meaning it gives money an overdue influence in our political affairs. That was indeed the argument that Sanders made. That was indeed the argument that they agreed with. And now you are using a super PAC in order to get those people to vote Biden. Meaning, even in the very process of you trying to get those people and con those people to vote for Joe Biden, you use a device to which they find onerous. Meaning they literally have to move into your direction to the right, even to hear the message. Yes, I consider that to be a betrayal. You are basically using a device that these people hate in order to try to con these people back into the party. So on the other point to that, from a political point of view, meaning from the standpoint of the left, this is a Knitwitch strategy. It is a strategy that the left has roundly tried for the last 40 years. As the left had been told, you have nowhere else to go, and Bill Clinton destroys Glass-Steagall, destroys welfare, you have nowhere else to go, destroys the Telecommunications Act, you have nowhere else to go, expands the prison population, even knowing the disparity between African Americans and whites because of the way they were doing drugs, knew that was there, and still went through with it. Joe Biden was a big help for that. NAFTA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership under Obama, or at the very least the attempts to pass it, letting homeowners go bust, basically going through this notion of not billing out homeowners while protecting and throwing his body on Wall Street. I guess I'm making the very basic point that it didn't matter what Democrats did. You still continued to back them because you were so terrified of Republicans. I'm saying as long as that device is in play, then yes, for the most part, this notion of as long as that is in play, the left will never get what they want. You will never get any level of policy concessions if you give your support over for nothing. And that's basically what the left has been doing for the last 40 years. I don't know what you're going to tell these people to try to convince these people in order to vote for Biden, be it Hispanics or be it lefties, the youth of the political space. But whatever you're going to tell those people, basically you have nothing to offer them. The only thing you can give them is either fear or you can give them cons. There is nothing between those things that you can offer them. The only thing Joe Biden is going to offer them is what the other Democrats offered every other lefty that still fell in line because they were terrified of Republicans and they thought they were lessening the amount of harm that existed in the world by backing the random Democrat. You are basically going to incentivize your own being taken advantage of. The political space is not there to necessarily give you anything. And the very compromise that takes place when one group is going up and negotiating with another group, that never takes place on the left. Any notion of accountability, for the most part, has been utterly destroyed in our political space. And lefties get a narrow focus of their situation, and they would say, I must support this random candidate. And in saying they must support this random candidate, the excuse is Republicans are god-awful, and I'm terrified of them. They're going to kick babies. They're going to eat puppies. I got to keep them out of office. Missing the point that by not having any standards, year after year after year, as one election takes place after the next, the standards are driven down, and you're given a worse and worse option. The reason is because cash basically flows through your political process. And if you don't have anything that puts a stopgap on that, basically a standard, a litmus test, some level of credible resistance where you say, yeah, no more. Basically the same notion of a striking union within the context of a company that is screwing those people over. You work for Amazon. Amazon decides it's not going to do anything or be transparent about the number of people with coronavirus. You're concerned about your health. And you say, yeah, no more. Why? Because the paycheck and everything else, all of the advantages of it, mattered less than you having some level of resistance in level of standards that you're willing to accept. The left doesn't seem to have that. And because the left doesn't have that, the political space continues to move further and further and further to the right. You can't look at elections as individual events. You have to look at them over the course of time, meaning 20 years, 30 years. And over the course of time, as you've taken the one specific policy that basically has incentivized your own being taken advantage of, it hasn't worked. And once again, you have creatures of the party trying to sheepdog lefties back into the party to vote for their particular person. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you're trying to get anything done from the standpoint of the left, you should have something to offer. The reason I said this is a Knitwitch strategy is because the thing that you need to be able to do is offer them something. Your issue here is political concessions, not trying to sweet talk them into backing some random Democrat. There's a difference in those things. The left if you are looking out for the best interests. And this is why they say the mass graves of movements is basically the Democratic Party. All of it, AOC, be it Elizabeth Warren, be it Bernie Sanders himself, can't say the thing that needs to be said for the left to get any notion of policy concessions. And what that is basically making the argument that, yes, we've lost this because the candidate who we needed to fight didn't know any level of martial arts. Fair enough. By the same token, we have standards that we're willing to go on or not. We're willing to vote for somebody who's backing Medicare for all. We're willing to vote for somebody who's expanding Social Security and paying off college debt. That's our bare minimum. And say, and be very clear, from the standpoint of millions of lefties, saying you will lose if you don't toe this agenda. This agenda is popular from the standpoint of the public. And then immediately after that, ask, I thought they were terrified of Donald Trump. I don't understand. Are you saying that giving concessions, by the way, that is popular with the American public and especially popular with the Democratic Party, is beneath you, even if that means beating Trump and unifying the party? Well, that's weird. Meaning, the thing that needs to be said here is not acquiescing to the same norm that has taken place over the last 40 years. The thing that needs to be done is supporting very specific policies, not parties. Beyond not parties, being very determined and making the point that you either accept these policies or you will not give our support in the millions. You will lose, and you will continue to lose until you get to the point of acquiescing to these concessions. Either some craven politician or somebody that believes that at some point will come along. But there should not be any level of acquiescing to a party that is not representing your interests because it only incentivizes them to continue to not represent your interests. Standards. If the Democratic Party loses, my point is you shouldn't consider yourself a Democrat. It would be weird if a Republican voted for a Democrat. It might even be weird if a Green Party member voted for a Democrat because those are different parties. My point is whether or not you have a party to go to is less relevant than you not being willing to acquiesce to whatever you're given. If the Democratic Party loses, they chose to lose. They chose to pick Joe Biden. They chose to put a guy who has all sorts of, let's say, ethical issues associated with him, has all sort of cognitive issues associated with him, was one of the weakest candidates that could have went up against Trump, and yet here we are. They were okay with losing to Trump if that meant beating Sanders. We are not in the same party. Each and every one of them wanted to go to a broker convention, which means they understood that they were going to lose, but they thought ripping it out of Sanders' hands was more important than trying to beat Trump. That's reality. That happened on the debate stage. I guess my point is, what do you think happens if they did that? And do you think that all of them are unaware that they basically will fundamentally lose if they went through with that process? And yet, all of them were saying they were going to exactly do that process. It was understood, the fix was in to some degree, that they were working in tandem. It wasn't one person against another candidate. It was all of those candidates fundamentally against Sanders. And so this notion that they tell you have nowhere else to go while simultaneously being perfectly willing to tank it all if it means stopping you from getting in office. Well, it's problematic to support a party that is willing to do that. Because again, you only incentivize them from doing it again and again and again, which basically has taken place over the last 40 years. Look, I'm sick of lefties taking this weak spot or this weak position of, oh, they're shaming me. Oh, they're shaming me. Well, they can't shame you if you don't let them shame you. I mean, basically, your point of view needs to be, basically, look, you could win this if you gave concessions. And why is it so important to you to not give concessions if that means you could beat Trump? You want to unify the party, right? Here you are. Now, the catch is, lefties would need to say that. They would need to say their mass. Sanders should say that. Weaver should say that. Rocha should say, all of these people across the board should say that. If you want to get your policies accomplished, that's where you start. Your issue with getting your policy accomplished is not, or the issue with getting Joe Biden elected has nothing to do with whether or not you can con these people to vote for you. It has everything to do with Joe Biden not willing to give anything in order to get those people votes. There is a difference in those things. Trying to sheepdog these people into the party is a betrayal of an actual strategy that has a chance of success. Stop considering yourselves Democrats and considering yourselves people who are pushing for human rights. These are the policies that we want. You get our support or not based on whether or not you support these policies. Stand there. You've given your ultimatum. No, they're not going to like it, but they're not going to like it because for the last 40 years, they've had you basically complicit going along with anything. And like anything else, when you finally grow spine and a backbone, you will be tested. There is no magical door in this process. There is something to be said for needing to basically retool the car before you can actually get the car back on the road. And nothing will take place that's positive in the Democratic Party with the way it's organized. Burn it to the ground or change it. I don't particularly care which at this point. So one of the other interesting components to this has to do with, I mentioned the Our Revolution component. Well, and before we get to the Our Revolution component, this is going to suppress the vote. That's the last point. Over the years, I've made the argument that white privilege is basically blue no matter who. Even though they try to make the case that it's the opposite. It's not the opposite. Basically, the people who tend to not vote tend to be African Americans or people of color and people with low wage. Now, this has to do with these people coming to the realization that their vote and the energy that they're putting into the political system is not being put out in the sense of policies that they would need that would make their life tangibly better. If you were doing somewhat well off, you may actually think the system to some degree is working in your favor, in which case you may be more engaged politically. This is kind of why I make the point to say this is literally the epitome of white privilege. If you are in difficult straits, maybe you don't necessarily have the privilege of being able to just vote any blue no matter who, especially if that blue no matter who is not going to do anything for you, and your non-vote is effectively a vote of no confidence for that particular blue. You have a large contingent of people who would have typically voted Democrat that over the years have basically stopped when they realized that there was a corporate party that was not working in their interests, and the notion of workers and unions and all of this other stuff got tossed overboard in order to take massive amounts of cash to do favors. I'm unclear on how you correct that by basically trying to sheepdog your people into a party where the same effect is just going to perpetuate itself with a weak centrist that offers nothing and expects people to vote for him because of who he's not because of something he's doing. This is a great disservice to the left. And by the way, Sanders will also be doing a disservice to the left when he's going out shucking and jiving for Joe Biden. But at the very least, he's not using the super PAC to do it. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.